coming on the air with the legal whiplash at the southern border. That controversial Texas border law blocked, then unblocked, then blocked again. A political brawl between President Biden and the Texas governor as folks on the ground beg for some kind of clarity on how to tackle this humanitarian crisis. We'll take you live to Texas, where you'll hear from police and activists who say they're caught in the middle. Plus, a new record high for the markets yet again as the president's taken this huge swing to make computer chips here in the U.S. One company's reaping the benefits. Our team in Arizona hearing from Intel's CEO tonight. Then a new twist in the Kate Middleton saga. Boy, is it a twist. Somebody in the hospital where she had surgery may have tried to snoop on her medical records. How the conspiracies about the princess fit into the rise of AI. We're getting into that. And our NBC News investigation into the nationwide protests by pro-Palestinian groups and who might be behind them. Plus, Richard Simmons, perhaps giving some clarity to the whole I'm dying, I'm not dying thing he's been posting about for days now. The disease we're learning he is battling, or was, later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we're starting tonight with that total confusion at the border, right? This controversial law we've been talking about, letting Texas take the migrant crisis into its own hands. Blocked for now, but for how long? An appeals court down south hearing arguments today about it after the Supreme Court told them to basically get their act together. Remember, we're talking about this thing called SB 4. Texas wants to let state and local police arrest migrants who cross the border illegally. That's a really big difference from what happens now. Right now, only the feds really have the power to do that. Texas also wants to force judges to kick migrants out if convicted and lock up repeat offenders for decades. If you're having some whiplash on this story, you're not alone. Look at the timeline from just this week, right? Just this week, Monday, the Supreme Court bans it. Tuesday afternoon, as you saw on the show, they said, actually, Texas, go ahead for now. They put on this ruling that essentially meant that they were green lighting it. Then last night, another court, a different lower court, blocked it again to set up today's arguments. It's a pretty bananas back and forth for a law that could essentially determine border policy in this country. And the Texas governor claims it's President Biden's fault.
Joe Biden has done nothing to build any type of border barrier. The only thing he's ever done with border barriers is try to tear down the ones that Texas has put on our border.
We cannot stress enough here. The president did back a strict border plan, but former President Trump told Republicans, wait a second, don't pass this one. So now with all this legal limbo, we have some big questions here. First, is this law actually going to happen? Will it actually go into effect? How can police prepare for it? You're going to hear from some officers in a second who are like, I don't know, it's kind of unclear. And then will Mexico agree that Texas can do that? Right now, the country's president says no way.
We are against this draconian law that is completely against human rights.
David Noriega is live for us in Eagle Pass, Texas. Okay, so David, this is like the third time this week that you and I have talked about this particular law and its impact on Texas. Based on what we're hearing in court, it sounds like there's some skepticism of the arguments from the state here. Talk us through it.
Yeah, Hallie, first of all, I am officially done making any kind of prediction about this case ever again.
Don't
that
need
time
to.
Is behind me. At
don't
this
want
point,
you to. Yes.
Good. You know, I would say actually based on the hearing this morning that the judges are split. This is a 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. We heard one judge asking a lot of tough questions of the attorney representing Texas. Interestingly, by the way, the attorney representing Texas on a number of occasions explicitly admitted that he could not say in any significant detail what concretely it would look like if some really key provisions of this law would be, actually implemented on the ground. Then we had another judge asking tough questions of the lawyer representing the federal government. That judge, interestingly, is the former general counsel for Governor Greg Abbott, who was appointed to the federal bench by Donald Trump. Hallie?
There's also the aspect of local police who seem to be super unclear about what this means for them, moving forward. Let me play what the sheriff of Maverick County said. Watch.
I felt very nervous because I don't have any information. I didn't know if it was going to be working like the way we're working right now with an all-star operation. I didn't know if it was going to have to be automatically arresting immigrants and processing, because to process one individual takes 45 minutes in this jail, 45 minutes. And you know that immigrants are coming in bunches. Where are we going to put them?
I know that activists you're talking with, David, say this is just like a huge wrench into a system that already had its issues.
Yeah, so it's helpful to remember, Hallie, that for the last 3 years, Governor Abbott has already been arresting migrants who cross the border between ports of entry and prosecuting them under existing trespassing statutes that already exist in state law. What SB 4 would change is that there would be a new criminal statute under which to arrest and prosecute them. So there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that's completely uncharted territory, but we do have a sense from the way Operation Lone Star has been implemented that probably DPS would be making these arrests and they would be targeting migrants that they see crossing the border. That said, obviously there are police departments and, as we just heard, sheriff's departments who also would be tasked with enforcing this law in one way or another. They seem to be completely in the dark about what that would look like. On the sort of attorney side of things, I spoke to Amruta Jindal. She runs an organization that has been providing pro bono legal defense to migrants arrested under Operation Lone Star and would do the same for migrants arrested under SB 4 were it to go into place. I'll play you a little bit of what she said. Take a listen.
This new law being enforced would just be, a whole new level of constitutional problems that we would face in the system. Really, that's what we're seeing here is the state of Texas trying to control immigration rather than letting the federal government do it.
The point here, Hallie, is that Operation Lone Star, those arrests under Operation Lone Star have already been bedeviled with constitutional challenges. They've gotten slowed down a ton in the courts. The same thing would happen probably to a much greater degree with any kind of arrest that happens under SB 4. Hallie.
There's also, we talked about the plan where I'm sitting here in Washington, right? There was a plan in place to potentially strengthen the border. I want to show people $20 billion for more Border Patrol officers, judges, beds. And yet, what's so interesting here is this tension continues to be ratcheted up, specifically between Texas and its governor and the Biden administration.
Yeah, we have to remember that this is all part of a process, a dialogue, a conflict that is inherently really at its core political, right? I mean, Greg Abbott has done a lot more than just SB 4. There's the busing thousands of migrants to big cities and blue cities, in blue states rather, putting razor wire and other kinds of barriers along the Rio Grande and the banks of the Rio Grande. SB 4 is probably its boldest move in this conflict, but it is just one part of that larger picture. Hallie?
David Noriega live for us there at Eagle Pass. Plenty to cover. David, thank you so much. Let's take it to Wall Street now because the stock market's closing at record highs yet again after the Fed is saying today it sees 3 interest rate cuts coming sometime this year, just not right now. Look at these fresh numbers, new numbers into us in just the last hour. The Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P after that meeting. You see them there. Of course, big surprise here since inflation is holding at around 3% and the Fed really wants to see it closer to 2 before dropping rates. I want to bring in Brian Chung for more. Okay, we say this a lot on this show, right? The markets are not the economy, right? There is a difference there. And obviously, this news out of the Fed was good news for markets. But what about for folks who are like, hey, I want to buy a house. Hey, I want to buy a car. I'd like to see some of these interest rates start to drop. What's the deal?
Yeah, well, the deal here is that with the Federal Reserve not moving on interest rates today, that those relatively high borrowing costs for your credit cards, for your car loans, for your mortgages are going to remain high for a little bit longer, but hopefully not that much longer, because the Federal Reserve is also messaging that it could be very likely that we would see interest rate cuts later on this year. And that's because alongside the announcement that, yes, they weren't going to do anything on interest rates today, that they have these economic projections that show a large amount of policymakers within the central bank messaging the likelihood and projection that they could lower interest rates 3 times this year. There are 6 other meetings for the rest of the year. So if you wanted to maybe look at it in that way, you can say every other meeting perhaps that might happen. Either way, the Federal Reserve hasn't messaged any sort of specific plan with the timing of those rate cuts. And the reason why, because it depends on inflation. They want to see that progress get closer to 2% before they start cutting interest rates. They're not there yet. But we'll see whether or not in the next few meetings, next one May 1st, whether or not they see them at that point in time.
Brian Chung, we're glad to have you sorting through all of it for us tonight. Thank you. So listen, tonight the Biden administration is planning to write another big check in its push to keep more semiconductor manufacturing here in the U.S. And interestingly, right, and perhaps unsurprisingly in an election year, picking a key swing state to make that announcement. There's President Biden just speaking in Arizona at an Intel plant. Watch.
For the first time in a long time, many of these facilities won't just manufacture regular semiconductors. They're going to once again begin to make the most sophisticated, advanced, and powerful leading-edge chips. We are leading the world again. We're proving it's never been a good bet. It's never been a good bet to bet against America.
We're talking about, right, for like microconductor, these tiny little computer chips that power, honestly, everything, probably something you're touching right now, your phone, your computer, your car, AI, et cetera. Intel would get up to $8.5 billion in money, plus $11 billion in loans to help its construction and expansion of some of these places to make these chips in the states you see here, Arizona, Oregon, Ohio, New Mexico. Intel says that's going to create thousands of jobs. Christine Romans is out there in Arizona. Listen, call it what it is, a big win for Intel. You talked with the CEO not too long ago. Tell us more.
Yeah. Look, you know, these jobs have been moving overseas for about 30 years. I mean, you had more than 200,000 of these high-tech semiconductor manufacturing jobs in the U.S. in like 2006, and they went to cheaper labor markets. And look, it was 30 to 40% more expensive to make them here. These investments changed that and level the playing field. That's what Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, told me. And he talked a little bit about how important this timing is right now for making sure you have resiliency in your global supply chains and you're making stuff here in America. Listen.
We wanted this industry here. We invented it, and it is critical to every other industry. Everything uses chips and all the benefits that that brings across our advancements.
You remember after COVID, we saw those snarled supply chains were really a big problem. And we're looking into the future where so much of these chips are made in Taiwan, right? And the potential that conflict with China could maybe limit those supplies is something the U.S. wants to make sure it insulates itself against.
There's also, obviously, when you talk about money, jobs, going into some of the places where these plants, where these facilities are, right?
Right, so 6,000 construction workers are working at this location behind me here, building out, they're called fabs, building out this particular fab. And in the end, when this is done in maybe just shy of 3 years, you'll have 3,000 highly skilled manufacturing workers here, to say nothing of all of the union labor that's going in here right now, which the president highlighted at that speech just a couple of hours ago, all of the union labor going here. So we talked to a lot of restaurant owners and people in town over the past couple of days, and they're hoping that there's a multiplier effect on some of these jobs, that you're just going to see sort of more economic activity in general here in Maricopa County. But I'll tell you, the flip side of that here is that you've got home prices up 50% in this county over the past 4 years, rents up almost 40% in this town over the past 4 years. So while everyone is pretty excited about the economic development from this, they're also still saying, Hallie, affordability is still issue number one for a lot of these people.
Christine, thank you very much. We're glad to have you out there in the field walking us through all of it. Lots to talk about there. Appreciate it. Tonight, we'll take you out west because police in Idaho are on a manhunt after an inmate's escape from a hospital left 2 correctional officers hurt from gunshots. Cops are looking for this guy. We're about to show you here. Here he is. They say he got away as he was being taken back to prison after being treated in that hospital. Went down really early this morning in Boise. A different suspect apparently pulled up to the hospital in this car. You see it. Opened fire on those officers before driving away. The officers are expected to survive. NBC's Dana Griffin is following this one for us. So what else do we know?
Hallie, investigators are calling this a coordinated attack. They say the suspect, 31-year-old Skylar Mead, went to the hospital for what they describe as self-inflicted wounds. Now, they would not describe the extent of his injuries, but they also released photos showing him with a bloody face. They believe, they wouldn't say specifically, but they alluded to that he did this in order to be taken to the hospital to try to get broken out of custody, and that's exactly what happened. So this happened just after 2 o'clock this morning. As you mentioned, he was being discharged from the hospital after being treated. That's when this unknown accomplice showed up, shot 2 officers. A 3rd officer was also injured during the shooting. They fled in what they believe is a 2020 gray sedan. They released photos of that vehicle. They right now say Meade could be anywhere. They are asking people to not approach him. They say he is violent and dangerous and clearly has a propensity for violence. They are asking people to not confront the suspects if they see them, but to call 911. Right now, they are combing the state and possibly beyond looking for these 2 suspects. Investigators say that Meade is a known member of the white supremacy group, the Aryan Knight. So they released photos showing his photos, and right now they're searching for the suspect. Hallie?
Dana Griffin live for us there in L.A. Thank you. So listen, overseas now, this data privacy watchdog in the U.K. is launching a new investigation into the hospital where Kensington Palace says Kate Middleton got abdominal surgery because of a new report from the Mirror that at least one staffer at that London clinic tried to basically snoop on the medical records of the princess. A government information office in the UK tells NBC News it got the breach report. It's investigating. We should note the clinic says it'll take some kind of a disciplinary action if it turns out this breach actually happened. Of course, this all comes as the global speculation. I mean, if you've been living anywhere other than under a rock, you have heard or seen about this somehow. These conspiracy theories, honestly, about the health of Kate Middleton, where she is. These wild speculative claims that she's in a coma, has a body double, that the video of her walking with Prince William is fake. Listen, Kensington Palace says she's doing well. Remember, she's supposedly not coming back to work until after Easter next week. To be clear, there's no reason to believe these conspiracies about her. It's not just Kate, of course. There's all these conspiracy theories that are out there that get a ton of attention, especially now with AI, the ability to edit or change or manipulate almost anything. These Kate theories raise some questions about authenticity for all of us as conspiracies keep playing a bigger and bigger role in politics and in culture. Remember that right-wing conspiracy that Taylor Swift was part of some kind of covert mission to help President Biden win re-election? That Senator John Fetterman has a body double, that maybe even Oprah has one too. Again, super clear. No evidence of any of these conspiracies. I want to bring in Matt Bradley now. And it's like this interesting world that we're in where this discussion around Princess Kate, right, Kate Middleton, sits at the nexus of royal coverage, of kind of celebrity gossip, and of the sort of new frontier that we're in as technology gets better and better.
Yeah, Hallie, and I can't believe you're saying there's no evidence to believe any of these conspiracy theories. I mean, it sounds like you're part of the conspiracy. That sounds like what someone who's part of the conspiracy would say.
Don't you do that. Don't you do that.
I think that's what we're seeing here, and I think that's what everybody's waking up to, is that when you're dealing with conspiracy theorists, there is no way to refute a conspiracy theory to a conspiracy theorist. That's kind of what makes it a conspiracy theory. Every time you try, you just look like you're part of it even more. And now we're talking about this medical breach, and this sounds like a very, very serious thing. This is the first thing we're hearing from the beginning of this that approaches a criminal act. And it is, apparently, if it's proven to have happened, it would be illegal. But important to note here, Hallie, the Kate Middleton spent 2 weeks in the London clinic, where it sounds as though, and if we are to be believed, and if her absence is to mean anything, it sounds as though she had very invasive surgery. So I kind of am wondering to what extent this person who was looking for their medical records might have had a medical motive to do so. I mean, if there's a really serious surgery, don't you want to see what that person's medical records were? That having been said, it'd be hard to resist the temptation, if you had access to those files, not to look into them, considering the firmament, considering everything we're hearing and everything that you just described that's been going on for the last couple of months, talking about where Kate Middleton is. So, I mean, I think that we are going to start to see more investigation on this. ITV, British broadcaster, just reported 3 people at the London clinic are now under investigation. Hallie?
One of the threads that you've pulled on, Matt, that I think is interesting and especially important here is this idea of the tensions between the royals and the public, right? And there are differences in some of those interactions, or at least some of those perceptions, where you are in the UK versus where I am in the US. But there's this mantra that reportedly has been something that the royals have had: never complain, never explain. Pull on that.
Well, okay, so this gets a little bit complicated and a little bit lofty here, Hallie, because the fact is, when you're talking about privacy, that's what I'm here for, when you're talking about privacy, patients here enjoy the same privileges that they do in the U.S. They're not supposed to have any divulging of their privacy, of their medical records to the public, because they're private citizens. The fact is, in the British Constitution, in the UK, in the whole notion of monarchy, the fact is that the sovereign, the monarch, is not a private citizen. That person, while they do enjoy the law, they do enjoy protection from the law, that person is a function of the state. The sovereign of this nation finds its embodiment in the person of the monarch. There's an argument to be made, and one that you could have made centuries ago, that that person's health is a matter of national security, and that their records and that their information should be treated as such. Hallie?
Matt Bradley, live for us there in London. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Back here at home, the calendar may say it's spring officially, but Mother Nature is saying, nah, I don't think so, because there's snow on the ground tonight and in the forecast for some of the country. Look at this. Cornell student, by the way, a meteorology student, how about that, posting this video of a snow squall blowing through campus this afternoon. Here, this one's posted by somebody in northern Vermont who said winter is cranking. Winter is wintering for sure, at least there. The National Weather Service put in place alerts for parts of upstate New York, Vermont, Maine, where they could see as much as 8 inches of snow by tomorrow. Bill Cairns is joining us now. Let's, again, real talk, as we like to do here on this show. Not a shock to have spring storms, right? That said, this has been a very strange winter for some of these regions. So a March snowstorm is a little bit unusual.
Yeah, some of these areas were in the 70s and people were getting tans already, but old timers will tell you, yeah, it was a little too soon. And yeah, here's the snow squall action. It's been a pretty serious one that's been moving through the Capital District region. Not fun driving into these things. You know, it's almost like driving into in the summertime to like a thunderstorm. You're just blinded by white with all the snow as you drive through these. So that's why they can be dangerous. And sometimes we get pileups on the highways from these. And that right now is happening on the New York State Thruway heading outside of Albany. There's not a lot of snow with this. Tonight in Maine, we're going to get hit pretty good, and you'll be doing some shoveling tomorrow morning. But south of Maine, this is just a minor event. We're already keeping tabs on the next storm because this one is just beginning to show up here on our maps. The blue shows you the snow in Montana and areas of North Dakota. Winter weather advisories just issued from Montana through Bismarck, Fargo to the Minneapolis area. Minneapolis for you, Friday morning appears to be the worst of it. And this isn't a huge event, but considering the flowers are up and the grass is green, you're going to be covered. Bismarck about 3 to 6 inches. Minneapolis is going to get about 2 to 3 inches out of this. Much of central Michigan is going to get 3 inches out of this. And areas from about Albany, Boston northwards, a pretty serious snowstorm. It looks like Saturday morning into Saturday afternoon. So to time this all up for you, this is Thursday with that heavy rain in the south. And then all of this mess comes to the East Coast. Hallie, you are not going to like your Friday evening and Saturday morning in the D.C. area. We're going to get soaked.
Oh, thanks for that, Bill. You're always ending on a cheerful note. I really appreciate it. Bill Cairns. Love that for you. I didn't say it, you did. Very, very good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Here in Washington now, House Republicans are making this last-ditch push to try to pump some life into their impeachment investigation into President Biden. So how's that process going? They called a couple of Hunter Biden's former business partners to testify, including one who couldn't be there in person because he was calling in from federal prison, serving time for securities fraud. Now, this jailhouse call and lack of any evidence so far connecting the president to his son's business dealings is what led Democrats to try to basically dunk on Republicans' investigations.
What we are seeing here today is a continuation of the 15-month saga of the Republican majority lost in the desert.
This is the best guy they can get. A guy sitting in prison who can't even be here.
So again, this investigation's been going on for months. House Republicans so far have not turned up anything that implicates the president and his son's business dealings. One witness on the Democratic side, Lev Parnas, who used to work with Rudy Giuliani, saying essentially earlier today that Republicans are being led on by disinformation. Listen.
The American people have been lied to by Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and various cohorts of individuals in government and media positions. The only information ever pushed on the Bidens in Ukraine has come from one source, and one source only: Russia and Russian agents.
All right, I want to bring in Ryan Nobles, who's covering this for us on Capitol Hill. Just straight up gut check here, right? Did this today move the needle in this impeachment investigation?
I think the fair answer to that question, Hallie, is no. This was just a lot of retreaded information that Republicans have rolled out time and time again, and a very similar Democratic response to a lot of this information. Keep in mind, the reason that Republicans used these two witnesses to be a part of this public hearing, and we should also point out that Hunter Biden turned down the opportunity to appear as part of this hearing today, is because they're the only two of the many that they've called before them that have even come close to specifically implicating the president and his son and his brother's business dealings. But even their implications are a degree removed from direct evidence that would rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. They're phone calls that the president may have taken part of, some while he was vice president, some while he wasn't even a member of or in public office in any way, shape, or form. And then you have the testimony of Lev Parnas that you presented there. This is a guy who the Trump campaign specifically solicited and hired to go into Ukraine to look for specific evidence that the Biden family was involved in some level of corruption. And as you rightly point out there, he specifically said he found none, and then even went a step further and said that Russian disinformation was at play here. We did get a response from Rudy Giuliani, who was, of course, the person that Parnas worked with on behalf of the Trump campaign. And Giuliani said this: Parnas is desperate to generate headlines in order to sell his fledgling book, and Democrats on Capitol Hill are perfectly fine using a serial liar to protect Joe Biden. Hallie, to get back to your initial question here, does this change the dynamics at all? Chances are, if you watch this hearing, you believe that Joe Biden should be impeached. You probably still believe that. Chances are, if you don't think he should be impeached, you probably still believe that. The sum total of all of this is that if Republicans had the votes to impeach Joe Biden, they probably would have already done it. And there's a good chance that after today's hearing, they're not any closer.
But so then what is the next step for the House GOP, right, conducting these investigations? Are they pushing forward? Is this something that we're going to continue to see throughout the course of this election year?
I think it's a really important thing for our viewers to keep in mind here, Hallie. I don't envision a scenario where the Republicans are going to come out, hold a press conference and say, our impeachment inquiry is over. We've decided not to file articles of impeachment, right? Because that would essentially admit that they don't have enough and that they're going to exonerate Joe Biden. This is just going to continue to play itself out. They're probably not going to do a heck of a lot in the public eye. Maybe they get to a point where they look for an off-ramp where they send criminal referrals over to the Department of Justice. That's something that Chairman Comer has suggested. But at this point, the idea that we're going to be seeing a vote on articles of impeachment in the near future, I think, is something that is very unlikely.
Super important context. Ryan Nobles, glad to have you there on the Hill. Thank you. Lots more coming up here on the show, including maybe more trouble tonight for TikTok. What our team's learning about possible hearings over a ban that could affect 150 million of us. Plus, why a new study says a weird type of bacteria could be making colon cancer worse. A not-so-happy first for the United States. We'll explain in our 5 things in just a sec. But first, in just the last few hours, the Alabama governor signing a controversial anti-DEI bill that's forcing public universities and colleges in that state to figure out a path forward. This new law moves to ban money for DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs, with opponents calling it a crackdown on free speech and diversity pushes. So that means no more money, no new money for these programs at public universities, at local boards of education, at government agencies. It also limits the teaching of what the law calls, I'm quoting here, divisive concepts around race, gender, identity, somewhat unrelated but still included in the bill, a ban on transgender people using the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity. Alabama, part of a pattern here, right? Look nationally, pull back a little bit. More than 30 states have introduced or passed or put in place anti-DEI legislation. This particular bill, the one in Alabama, is set to take effect on October 1st. Looks like that bill that the House passed here in Washington that could potentially ban TikTok in the U.S. will not be taken up by the Senate anytime soon, right? We're not talking like anytime soon, meaning a couple of weeks. We're talking maybe months. Senators today filling in reporters after a classified closed-door briefing say they're really concerned about the national security threat from TikTok and its Chinese-based parent company, ByteDance.
My reaction to this briefing is that TikTok is a gun aimed at Americans' heads.
ByteDance has to do whatever the Chinese government tells them to do, and that's why ByteDance should not be allowed to own TikTok. And if they do, then TikTok should not be allowed to operate in the United States.
Okay, so they're concerned, right? Does that mean they're going to move ASAP, snap their fingers, get the ball rolling on this TikTok ban? Not quite. A couple of key senators are talking about holding public hearings, maybe even working up their own bill to try to regulate it. That takes time, right? That is something that could press pause on this process. Hallie Vitale is joining us now. Pressing pause on the process is something that TikTokers want to see, right? They've been out. They've been lobbying members of Congress. They've been lobbying the White House to try to slow this down. Give us a reality check on the pace of this kind of thing, because it's huge news, I think, for people who use TikTok, who want to see TikTok stay.
It's definitely big news, and I know a lot of people who aren't politically inclined, but who are suddenly very interested in my line of work because they're watching what Congress is doing here. They watched very closely as the House passed a bill banning TikTok, and now they're waiting to see what the Senate is ultimately going to do. But you're right when you point out the fact, and we are in a little bit of a wind tunnel here because we've got a window open even though we're inside, but the wind tunnel might be hitting TikTok, even though it's not happening soon, because as senators start talking about the ways in which they would try to legislate the platform, it's not going to be as simple as a blanket ban on TikTok. I don't even know how you would start to implement that. Instead, what senators are starting to push for is a change in ownership. That's something that was central in the House bill. Some senators say, all right, the House bill is enough. We just got to tinker around the edges here. But there are other senators, including Senator Maria Cantwell, who say, well, maybe that's not the only way of going about that. Watch what she said.
We're going to resolve this one way or another, for sure, because it's an important issue. Hopefully we'll get on to a privacy bill. Hopefully we'll get on to other data security measures. But, you know, this is the information age. We need some new tools.
And Hallie, you and I know Congress. You know that just because the House passes something, senators aren't going to be like, oh, they did a great job. Let's just do it the way they did. They got their own ideas. They got their own ways they want to do this. And that means the process is going to be slower.
Hallie Vitale, so any sense, just like, I know we can't predict it, it's also an election year. There's also been this issue, I mean, you touched on this, right, younger voters. Is this a slow walk past November, do we think? Do we know?
I don't think so. And I asked Senator Blumenthal about this, one of the vocal critics of TikTok. And I said, hey, you mentioned that it's an election year. Does this mean you guys need to take action before November? And he said, yes, as soon as we can before November would be ideal because of the ways that people get their news off of an app like TikTok. That's one of the reasons why they want to move fast. But it's also one of the reasons that lawmakers have national security concerns in the first place, the ways that this kind of a platform could be manipulated by China if they were to get a hold of, and in the ways that they are able to use both the data that they're collecting from this or the algorithm itself.
Hallie Vitale, glad to have you there breaking it down for us on the Hill. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, an ex-officer in Mississippi who was part of that self-proclaimed goon squad we've been covering, sentenced to 40 years in prison. That's just hours after another former deputy got nearly 18 years behind bars. Both of them pleaded guilty last year to torturing and abusing 2 black men in a racist attack. 2 other quote-unquote goon squad members are set to get sentenced tomorrow. Number 2, emergency crews in Utah say 1 person was killed after this house explosion this morning. Look at that. That's the aftermath there. Somebody else who was there is okay, but officials are trying to figure out what exactly caused this blow up in the first place. Number 3, former Nickelodeon producer Dan Schneider apologizing for his behavior at the network after the release of that Quite On Set docuseries. He produced some of Nickelodeon's most popular shows like iCarly and The Amanda Show. This docuseries featured several actors who alleged abuse, inappropriate behavior, and a toxic work environment working on shows he produced. Schneider now says, I was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. This is the same docuseries we talked about, I think it was last week on the show, where actor Drake Bell accused his dialogue coach of sexual assault. A representative for that coach did not respond to a request for comment. Number 4, a new type of bacteria that gives you plaque on your teeth might also be making some people's colon cancer worse, according to a new study. Researchers say this particular bacteria seems to block tumor cells from drugs that can fight cancer. It was found on like half of the tumors they tested. This is an important discovery, though. Experts say it could pave the way for new treatments and new screening methods. Number 5, some sad news, quite literally, with the U.S. dropping out of the top 20 happiest countries in the world for the first time ever, according to the World Happiness Index report. Wah, wah. Those of you under 30 are dragging down our ranking, so, you know, there it is, apparently among the most miserable in the developed world. I'm just the messenger. I'm just telling you, that's what the numbers show. When we come back, a lot more to get to here on the show, including why one person in Kansas got pretty unlucky with their parking spot. Oh, boy. Could you watch that all day? I could. Plus, a new investigation tonight after an airport executive in Arkansas was badly hurt in a shootout with the feds. What his family is now telling our team, coming up. You've seen the protests for a ceasefire in Gaza happening in cities all across the country. Pro-Palestinian groups who want the U.S. to stop sending weapons to Israel and for that country to end what they say is the occupation of Gaza. Valerie Castro and our investigations team looked into who's behind those protests and allegations that could be tied to terror groups.
Protesters flying the Palestinian flag have taken over bridges, flooded city streets, free, free, free Palestine, and even delayed Oscar arrivals in Hollywood. All in the name of the pro-Palestinian movement, growing since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel and the swift military response. But some pro-Israel organizations raising concerns, questioning if protest groups could be linked to or financially supported by terrorist organizations. The Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington think tank focused on national security, testifying on Capitol Hill.
This country has seen an alarming number of rallies, both in major cities and on college campuses, expressing support for the terrorist organization.
The Anti-Defamation League, which tracks protest groups, says one of them, named Within Our Lifetime, has welcomed support from Samidoun, a Canadian-registered nonprofit banned in Germany and Israel for its alleged support of Hamas, and has promoted messaging from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or PFLP, a designated foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. State Department.
They promote the language of terrorist organizations like the PFLP on their social media, and they talk about resistance by any means necessary, which legitimizes the violence that we've seen, especially after, the October 7th massacre.
Within Our Lifetime's founder, Nardine Kiswani, says the group doesn't receive any overseas funding.
There's no sources, no proof of this anywhere.
Samadoun has not responded to NBC News' request for comment. An investigation by NBC News reviewed dozens of government and court records, tax filings, and social media posts of several key groups behind the demonstrations, including Within Our Lifetime, and found no clear evidence financially linking Hamas or PFLP to U.S.-based pro-Palestinian groups.
Besides the rhetoric, do you know if there is any evidence of material support?
No, I mean, historically over the years, this has been a question, but I'm not aware of anything that has come up now. But I think that scrutiny is getting, deeper, certainly in a post-October 7th world.
Grassroots organizers like Kiswani formed Within Our Lifetime nearly a decade ago and says, "You can't hide." Her childhood as a Palestinian American was shaped by a post-9/11 New York, when Muslim Americans were being persecuted.
I knew that there was this sense of hatred and racism towards our community that was unfounded. That allowed me to help empower my community to fight back against these claims.
Have you looked at the website where they track you?
Yeah.
What do you think when you see that?
I just think it's ridiculous. I think that they rely on a lot of Islamophobic, anti-Arab, racist tropes to sort of build their narratives.
But critics worry that words have the potential to encourage violence.
At what point does this rhetoric that dehumanizes people, at what point might that lead to some direct action?
Kiswani says the protest movement is peaceful, but it will not be silenced.
Ultimately, our message is Palestine deserves to be free, just like every other country, that Palestinians deserve to live in dignity.
Valerie is joining us now. So, Valerie, talk about the political context and backdrop to this as well ahead of the elections come November.
Well, so, Hallie, first, I just want to give a shout out to the incredible journalists at the NBC News investigative team. They are the ones that put in the long hours, the hard work of looking into the background of these groups. So we couldn't have done this story without them. But getting back to your question about the political implications, look, these groups are not just protesting against Israel. Some of them are also protesting against the Biden administration. We have seen that play out, for example, in Michigan during the primaries. There was the uncommitted campaign. They were asking voters to not vote for President Biden, but instead to vote uncommitted. But look, come November, if President Biden is not elected, there is the possibility that former President Trump could be back in office. And remember, he had the Muslim ban when he was in office. These groups say that doesn't mean that they are voting for Trump or giving him a chance. They say they will just vote, they will protest whoever is currently in the White House at that time.
Valerie Castro, thank you very much. NBC News covers hundreds of other stories every day, and because it can be tough to read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, the man charged in the chokehold death of Jordan Neely will stand trial this fall, this October. Prosecutors, remember, say Daniel Penny held Neely down for several minutes on a subway in New York last year. Penny's lawyers say he was defending himself. He's pleaded not guilty to charges that include second-degree manslaughter. Out of our Southern Bureau, the executive director of the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Arkansas apparently badly hurt in a shootout with federal agents today. Police say the ATF was there to serve a search warrant at his home. His family telling NBC News he's now on life support. Doctors do not think he'll survive. One agent was also shot but is expected to be okay. State police are now investigating. And out of our Midwest Bureau, take a look at this. Somebody very unluckily parking under a water main break. Obviously, that car not super salvageable at that point. Oof. Crews managed to eventually shut it off, but a bunch of businesses nearby were also affected. Nobody was hurt, unless you're talking about that owner's wallet, because that's a bummer. Coming up, one country could soon become the biggest player in AI. What we're learning about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, you don't want to miss this one. That's next. Saudi Arabia has new plans for a $40 billion push into AI. First reported by the New York Times, confirmed to sources to CNBC. If this whole thing goes through, that means that the Saudis could become the biggest player in a market that the entire world is paying attention to. And according to where talks stand right now, could see a partnership between Saudi Arabia and at least one of Silicon Valley's biggest venture capital firms. That would be the latest in this really big buying spree by the Saudis, pouring billions of dollars into other buzzy companies like Uber, Citi. Look at that list. It goes on and on to try to diversify its wealth away from oil. We should note here, Saudi's sovereign wealth fund and the American venture capital firm both have not replied to CNBC's request for comment. But let's bring in somebody who knows a thing or two about this, Mackenzie Sigalos from CNBC, who's following this one. Hey, Mackenzie, it's good to see you. So talk us through how big of a deal this could be for, like, a lot of players here, right? For the Saudis, for AI itself, for global competition, et cetera.
So, Hallie, if this goes through, we're talking about Saudi Arabia becoming the biggest AI investor on the planet with the help of Andreessen Horowitz, one of the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. So this is two titans potentially teaming up, which would be a massive deal. Now, sources have warned that plans could change, but what we know is that Saudi's $925 billion public investment fund has apparently been talking to VC firm Andreessen Horowitz for months about this $40 billion fund that would invest exclusively in AI projects. These would be companies along the supply chain, including the chip makers and data centers that power this entire ecosystem. And it's happening fast. They're reportedly targeting a launch date of the second half of 2024. And they kind of have a head start here. Andreessen Horowitz, which has a reputation for its smart investments, they were early to Coinbase and Facebook. Well, they've also got a robust AI portfolio comprised of nearly 100 startups. That being said, this is a frothy market. You know, just last month, the UAE was looking to launch its own AI fund that could potentially surpass $100 billion in assets under management. And, you know, we've got a lot of frothy valuations as well.
Super interesting, especially when you look at sort of the bigger picture here for the Saudis and all the money they're putting into other things, as we referenced there in that introduction, right? I mean, they're looking at some of these big, interesting tech companies, not all. I mean, Costco's on that list, too, to try to, it seems, spread the money around a bit.
Yeah, so it's funny. This AI fund, even though it's $40 billion, it would be roughly 4% of the overall sovereign wealth fund. So really a drop in the bucket. But it goes to this larger narrative of Saudi Arabia trying to become a major player on the world stage. For years, the UAE has been the Middle East go-to tech hub. But Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has really been working at making Riyadh the premier destination for tech talent in the region. Next month, the country is hosting a special World Economic Forum, part of this broader push by the kingdom to boost its profile. Meanwhile, they're working at diversifying the economy into tourism and tech. Oil's share of GDP has actually plunged from 70% to around 30%. And it's, you know, they've got that Vision 2030 initiative, all those flashy megacities. But from what I'm told, it's really just a sideshow to this core mission, which is to attract talent to feed a value creation cycle in AI specifically.
Mackenzie Sigalos, it's fascinating. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us. Appreciate it. Still to come, the number of people who are killed by cars, the most it's been in more than a generation. A lot of experts blaming distracted driving, dangerous roads, but some say there's another factor. We'll tell you coming up in The Original. So tonight's Original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight, it's the money that the White House this week says it'll give out, $44 million to try to make roads in this country safer for people who walk, people who bicycle, basically anybody who uses roads for anything other than driving. It's all part of this push to stop the increase in pedestrian deaths that we've seen all across the country. Here's Sam Brock.
Amy Cohen will never forget the moment when every parent's nightmare became her reality.
I looked down at my phone and I had like 30 voicemail messages. You know, it was the police, it was the hospital, it was my husband. I raced there.
Her 12-year-old son, Sammy, hit by a multi-ton SUV on his way to soccer practice.
The child's body cannot withstand being crushed by a van. And he held on for 5 hours but did not make it.
Sammy, one of nearly 4,800 pedestrians killed by cars in 2013, a number that's only risen, projected to pass 8,000 deaths in 2022. That's the highest in 4 decades, an 88% spike since 2010. So what's behind the surge? Some experts blame the rapidly increasing size of the vehicles on our roads.
4 to 5 new vehicles sold or leased in the U.S. in the past couple of years have been SUVs or pickup trucks or vans rather than cars.
And the difference between a pedestrian being struck by a sedan versus the high, blunt hood of an SUV or pickup truck could be the difference between a broken leg and a fatal head or neck injury, as deaths from SUVs rise faster than smaller cars.
I find that just a 10-centimeter increase in the front end height of a vehicle leads to about a 22% increase in the likelihood that the pedestrian dies.
And it's not just the size of vehicles. Experts point to other factors for the increase in deaths, like drivers distracted by smartphones and increasing rates of reckless and impaired driving. And the way many roads are designed in the U.S. makes the issue even worse. In 2021, most pedestrian fatalities happened on arterial roads, not highways or in downtowns, but multi-lane routes that radiate from city centers. Like this section of US 19 in Florida, with high speed limits, 6 lanes of traffic and crosswalks few and far between. It's a prime example of a street designed without pedestrians in mind. The outcome has been lethal. Between 2017 and 2022, nearly 50 pedestrians lost their lives here, one of the most dangerous stretches of road in the country. And there are dozens of deadly hotspots just like US 19 all across the U.S.
Roadway safety is an issue that resonates in all parts of the country.
Polly Trottenberg helped New York City bring down traffic deaths with its Vision Zero program, launched in 2014. Now, as Deputy Secretary of Transportation under Pete Buttigieg, she's working to expand it nationwide, attacking the problem from multiple angles.
We're focusing on vehicle design, roadway design, speed reduction, driver behaviors, and how we can better take care of people once they've been in a crash.
The most recent numbers have been encouraging, as early estimates show that pedestrian deaths fell 4% in the first half of 2023. But for Amy Cohen, the country still has a lot of catching up to do.
We are nearly 5 times as dangerous as 28 other nations of our peers. And it doesn't have to be this way. It does not have to be a deadly act to walk, to bike, to drive, to get around.
Sam Brock is joining us now. Okay, so Sam, we know that the government's trying to make roads safer. What about the cars?
Right. So first of all, big picture, Hallie, the Department of Transportation has doled out close to $2 billion to city governments all across the country for those macro kind of changes in city planning that we just heard about. But to your question about cars specifically, Secretary Trottenberg talked about a couple of things they want to incentivize car makers to do to help people outside of the cars, not necessarily the drivers or passengers, but people outside of the vehicle. So what I'm talking about right now, automatic braking for vehicles, where if there's a pedestrian, like you see on your screen right there, the car will just stop. And a lot of higher end vehicles do that right now. Your car might make a beep, beep, beep sound or some sort of urgent alert when someone is nearby, but this universally just stops them. Imagine how many lives that would save. She also discussed technology that would allow you to detect and scan and stop someone from driving if they appear to be impaired, like they've had too much to drink. The device in the car would detect that and just stop the vehicle. Now, the reason that I'm standing where I am on this specific corner in Miami, this is Biscayne Boulevard over my shoulder, is because a 33-year-old mom, Hallie, was trying to cross this street about a month ago and was hit by a semi-truck. Whole bunch of traffic like there is today. The driver did not see her. Can you imagine if that technology allowed the truck to automatically stop? We'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely could save lives. Sam Brock, important reporting. We're glad to have you bringing it to us tonight here on the show. Thank you so much. So listen, this is the point of the show where I typically say goodbye, like see you tomorrow, more coverage coming up. But before we go here, just a quick point of personal privilege. And it is very much a privilege to share with you that starting next month, I'll be joining you every week on NBC to anchor the Sunday edition of Nightly News, which is a sentence that just came out of my mouth that is real and wild to think about. It is an honor. It is very big shoes to fill, and I take that very seriously. I'm going to work my hardest to get you ready for your week ahead every week on our flagship broadcast. Of course, I will still see you right here on NBC News Now, 5 o'clock Eastern for this show. And with that, we'll be right back here, same time, same place tomorrow. Thank you so much for being along for this ride. More coverage comes up right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.